Good afternoon. This is Will Levy and Alan Kaufman from HUD. We are here for the live Q&A on the initial year funding for conversions of public housing under RAD. We've recently put out a couple of new tools and sent out a RAD blast, partially in response to a lot of feedback we've received from housing authorities and their partners of late that they still feel like this process is not as clear and intuitive as it could be. And so we hope that you find this presentation and the tools that we've released helpful in moving the ball forward to a simpler process. Just to remind everyone, we definitely encourage your questions. There's a way for all those who've registered to raise your hand, so to speak, and ask your question. We love when those who raise their hands ask their question over the phone, so that it's easier for us to follow the question and others to hear it versus written questions. But if you want to send yours in writing, that is fine as well. Go to the next page. Just as background, so just to define a couple of things. Sorry, this page is a bit wordy. The initial year is the term that we use to refer to really what's almost always a partial year, the period between when the contract is effective and the remainder of the calendar year. So in this case, if a project converted today and chose to have a half effective date of August 1. I'm just going to put a pin in a point I want to make later, that the now owners can actually choose to have a half effective date of August 1 or September 1 if they converted today, but that's almost an aside to this topic. But the initial year covers the point from which the half is effective to the rest of the year. The RAD statute requires cost neutrality, which is one of the key reasons why this is a little bit more complicated than we'd love it to be. In addition, it is due to the complexities of the Public Housing Operating Fund and Capital Fund. It's extraordinarily difficult for us to have built this program to scale so that everybody gets funded from the Section 8 platform immediately. So I think just want to address that off the bat, that some people say, well, why, if we're on the Section 8 platform, why aren't we funded according to the contract rents and immediately? And it's a combination of our statutory constraints as well as just high-level federal budget processes that really prevent numerous transfers of funds across accounts. It would be literally impossible to have implemented it that way, but we certainly could have, would have if we could have. So during the initial year, a covered project gets funded through not only any tenant rents that it collects, but also the Public Housing Operating Fund and Capital Fund at the level of those public housing subsidies that's available to that project in that year. And then only in the first full year following conversion are projects funded through the Section 8 accounts in accordance with contract rents. So that's just the basic background. I've mentioned the tools that we've released. We've put out a revised and simplified initial year funding tool. We've also published initial year funding instructions, both of which we think are much clearer than guidance that we had previously produced in other years. Okay, getting to process. First, at the financing plan, the PHA would submit the initial year funding tool, and this is an overview of the process. The PHA submits the initial year funding tool, and the real purpose of that submission is to make sure that key parties involved in the transaction, i.e. the PHA and the project owner, get this initial year funding difference. that there is, that it's not just the contract rents that they have to pay attention to looking at the overall deal, but that they're paying some attention to this because we've found a lot of parties were sometimes surprised to learn this after the fact. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page, we require the submission at the financing plan. As I'll show you in the next page, we're not really doing much with it. We just want to make sure that the parties are aware of the information, have come up with an estimate for themselves, and and are aware of that. So we ask for it to be executed by both the PHA and the project owner for those deals where the project will transfer to a different owner. Then at closing, immediately prior to closing, when the half effective date is known, the tool gets resubmitted with a final half effective date. So we'll get to the tool in a little bit. We'll walk through that. And one of the key variables is what is the half effective date. So it'll show that final amount. Again, it'll be executed by the PHA and the project owner. It will be submitted with a capital fund budget revision showing the capital funds that will be used for rental assistance, moving to budget line item 1503 unlocks. In that same budget revision request, this is a little bit of an aside, but just for convenience, in that same budget revision request, a PHA would also be showing any capital funds that are used for a development use in the RAD budget, pre-development or fees or actual construction would all go into 1504 line. What is HUD doing? So as I mentioned with the financing plan submission, we're not really doing anything. We just want to make sure that it's submitted and that it's signed, that on the ground there seems to be some acknowledgement of this process. Then at closing, what we're doing is making sure we have the right information to pass on to the capital fund office so that they can make the transfer for the capital funds that will be used for rental assistance to BLI 1503 unlocks. For the operating funds, we don't actually need the tool to make the move. We, as I'll show in the calculation later, it's all information that we have in-house, and so we don't need any additional information from the Housing Authority to move funds across 1503. So that's financing plan. And at closing, post-closing, once the funds are in 1503 or these calculations are made, the PHA will just be conveying the funds over to the project owner. We don't dictate whether it's monthly or if it's tri-monthly or if it's lump sums or what. We just it's just that is a local decision for the PHA and the project owner to agree to. I'll walk through just quickly both the operating fund and capital fund calculations. So the amount that will be moved to BLI 1503 for the operating fund and the maximum amount that can be conveyed to the covered project is determined by what we call the RAD operating fund percentage, which is applied to the project's operating fund obligation for the initial year, for the remaining months of that calendar year. And it's simply the units covered under RAD over the total ACC units at that property. As I said, we get that, we have that information. We don't really need any additional submission, because the PHA has told us how many ACC units are coming out of PIC in their PIC removal application. And we know how many ACC units are at the property in PIC. So through our own systems, we know we queue it up so that when a project is closed, it automatically pulls those two data points so that operating fund can make the move in BLI 1503. This isn't something that is happening yesterday or today, but will happen shortly. And a key note on that is, even if the money doesn't move to 1503 or moves maybe 2 or 3 months after closing or something like that, that doesn't change the operating fund percentage. If 100% of operating funds from August 1 through the rest of the year are supposed to move, are permitted to be conveyed to the property, regardless of whether HUD has moved the money to 1503. The PHA is authorized to convey those funds to the project. Another point is that like the capital fund, the PHA owner can choose to move a lesser amount to the covered project. HUD will still be moving the full amount to 1503, or as determined by the percentage, but the PHA and owner may decide that there's a lesser amount is appropriate. For the capital fund, it is not a percentage but a fixed amount, because the capital fund is when those obligations are made each year, it is a known amount each year. So what we do is we take the capital fund formula grant attributable to the project, which is published each year on the capital fund website, and we essentially prorate that by the portion of the units in the AMP that are converting under RAD or as being removed from PIC, and then times the months remaining in the year. Again, the PHA and project owner can choose to convey a lesser amount, and only the funds that will be conveyed to the covered project would be moved to the LOCKSS budget line item 1503. Okay, let's see. I think we'll just go to the tool now and walk through an example. One moment. So the tool used to be a worksheet with 4 tabs, and we've hopefully greatly simplified it. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fields to be filled in, as well as the signature boxes. And this is something we, as much as possible, we want any user to be able to operate. There are some things that are definitely information that only the PHA would really know, but we want this to be as comprehensible as possible. So first, PHA would pick a PIC development number. There are some helpful boxes that show up when you click on boxes, but there we go, thank you. We're going to pick one in Wyoming called Buffalo, or in the city of Buffalo in Wyoming. I don't think they're actually converting, but great. As you see, just by doing that, a number of the cells below have already populated the 30-unit property. The capital fund development, the capital fund amount has already is pre-populated. The next thing a PHA would do is enter in the number of converting units. Let's just say it's all 30 units are converting, and that the half will be effective August 1, 2016. So now that's basically most of the information that's needed to populate the worksheet. Go through the remaining steps. So for the capital fund, it goes through the calculation. The project amount is $35,377. 30 units are converting. There are 30 standing units at the AMP, so essentially 100% of the units at the AMP. There are 5 out of 12 months remaining in the year, so that amount gets prorated, and so the tool calculates that 14,740 in capital funds can be used for rental assistance for the balance of the year. And then there's a field for the PHA and owner to say, well, how much is actually going to be conveyed? Certainly there are PHAs that say, well, you know, the property right now is running on operating funds and tenant rents. Okay, I'm not taking out new debt that's relying on revenue immediately. So my preference would be to convey no capital funds as rental assistance, but instead use all the capital funds for this project to establish a capital replacement reserve and put it in my development budget. That's fine. So they'd enter 0 here, and in what they submit to us in the financing plan, they'd show all of that capital funds as in sources and uses, and that's totally fine with us, and happens all the time. the operating fund, there's another piece of information that a PHA would have to put in, which is the overall eligibility of the project under the operating fund, and that is a number that sometimes changes over the course of the year, isn't as easily extractable from our databases. So we've just built this tool so that the PHA submits that number. It's pretty readily available from any of your accounting offices or your staff that deal with subsidy. So let's say for this project, it's $50,000 that it's receiving an operating grants or the operating fund eligibility is, again, 30 units converting and 30 units of the project, so that's 100%. Right below it, you'll see what's the calculated RAD operating fund percentage. That means that for the rest of the year, HUD will be moving 100% of those funds to any future obligations to DLI 1503. There's a field to enter the operating fund proration level, but we've already pre-populated the tool to show what it is today, but that changes modestly within, say, half a percentage point or so over the course of the year, so it's worth updating for those who are completing this tool a little bit later in the year. And then it comes up with an amount. So we've covered the capital fund and operating fund. There's a field here just to say, you know, as you, we don't care about this, but as you are planning how you're going to operate the property for the rest of the year, it might be useful just to make sure you have a place to fill in what you expect to collect from tenant rents. And so let's say that's $20,000, and there you go. The tool adds up those amounts, and you can see the estimated project revenue and monthly revenue for the balance of the year for this initial year. You'd enter in your names below, print this out, sign it, and submit it to us with the findings and plan. Just as we'll start with the first question. Looks like Susan Miner. Hi, Susan.
Susan, you may need to unmute your line. All right, we'll come back to Susan.
Dee, you're unmuted and on the air. How can we help? Okay, going past Dee to Tim Preston.
Hi. Really, I just was trying to tell you that that whole last session there, I wasn't seeing anything on the screen.
Oh, when we were actually going through the tool?
Was that intentional? Yeah.
No. Oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
Let's see. We're going to go back to the tool, and if we can get it to show, Tim, if you just stay on for a second, if we can get it to show, I'll walk through that portion of the presentation again.
You don't really have to do that. I just, you know, there we go. I've got it now. I can see it now.
Okay. No problem.
I don't know if anyone else. I don't know if anyone else needs to see it, but we didn't get to see the tool. It's gone again. It was there. There it is again.
You still see it?
I see it now. It disappeared, and then it came back, but now it's here. There you go.
Okay, so if we get, thanks for that feedback. I'll walk through it a little bit more quickly this time because I suspect there are others.
I want to tell you, I'm a software vendor. Actually, it is not necessary for you to walk through that for me alone. But if other people did not have the presentation and want to see it, I mean, certainly feel free to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I think since no one else was able to see it, I'll still walk through it, but not for you, Tim.
Okay. Oh no.
Not for you.
But we know if it was just me. Okay.
If
Okay.
you wouldn't, just kidding. So anyway, so you're saying there's about 7 fields to fill in. There's the pick development number that you do at the top, and it auto-populates a number of the fields: the converting units, the capital fund data. Excuse me, it doesn't populate the converting units. It populates the capital fund data, the total units that we have in our system that are at the AMP, other information like that. We ask you for the converting units. That's the total number of units that are going to be coming out of PIC at the as a result of the conversion, and then the estimated or actual half effective need. And with those 3 items, most of the tool is pre-populated, and it's just the other blue boxes that we need you to fill in. So first is within the capital fund line. Once we've calculated how much capital fund is eligible to be used for rental assistance, the last row, or the last piece of that row says, well, how much would you like to be used for rental assistance? In the operating fund section, there's 2 fields to fill in. One is the project's operating fund eligibility number, which is from the operating fund subsidy form, as well as the operating fund proration level. Then we ask for the tenant rents, but again, as I mentioned, that's really just for your own planning purposes if you choose to use it. If you entered in 0 there, we wouldn't care. But if you said, hey, how is my project going to survive, and you entered 0, we'd say, well, don't forget about tenant rents, assuming it's still an occupied property. And then it's and then just enter in the signatories at the bottom, print it out and sign and submit. So sorry for the quicker version, but hopefully now that you had the visual, this is a little bit clearer for folks on the phone, except for Tim. And now we'll go back to questions. Thank you, Tim, for highlighting that. Lisa Petrosky, you're on the air.
I didn't get to see anything because, of course, couldn't see anything either. So that was all. I kept on typing in.
Oh. I guess it didn't. Okay, great.
That we were all having a problem with that.
Great, echoed. We'll go to the next question. Tony.
Same issue. I wasn't seeing the video, so I just asked for more video. I do have a question though.
Oh, perfect.
I have you. So I work with the Contra Costa County Housing Authority in California, and the version of RAD we're doing is replacing offsite in 14 different projects that are being awarded replacement PBVs, RAD PBVs for a public housing property that's being disposed. So when I do the number of converting units in this document, would I have 14 different initial year funding tools, or would I have one for everything?
One for each AMP, because you get your money by AMP. So if you have one AMP,
even though within each AMP there might be 4 or 5 different projects that are going to.
Is it 4 or 5 different transactions?
Yes.
So really so each each transaction will have its own separate initial year funding tool submission. And as Alan was saying, if you have an AMP that it's really going to be 3 different transactions, maybe your 3 different buildings that you're rehabbing, or 3 different transfers of the assistance off-site, those would be 3 different initial year funding tool submissions.
Okay, got it. That makes sense.
Sure. If, on the other hand, you are combining 2 AMPs into one transaction, as some agencies do, then you would need to submit 2 tools for that one transaction, because
that
the
makes sense.
tools
Well,
are level. Good question. Thanks, Alan.
Okay, thank you.
All All right, we have a couple of written questions.
We're going to look for the written questions in a second. While we do that, I've got another thought that Alan pointed out, which is just a few notes on half effective dates. So one of the things we recently announced is that project owners, at the consent of a PHA, typically our practice right now, or had been for closings, that you close at some point in the middle of the month and the half is effective the first of the month immediately following. And that's created a little bit of friction on a few fronts. And so we've now announced that we are okay if the project owner, and with the PHA's consent, wishes for the half effective date to be the following month. So if you converted today, our default would be an August 1 half effective date, but you could choose a September 1 half effective date if you preferred. That's point one. The second point is, just want to make sure everyone's clear, when we're talking about initial year funding, or we're talking about the half effective date and then the rest of the year. So if your half is effective December 1, then your initial year is 1 month. If your half is effective January 1, your initial year is actually a year. It's 12 months.
But the border is between December 1 and December 2.
Right.
If your closing is if your effective date is December 2, January 1 of the following year becomes the effective date, and you have a 12-month initial year.
Yeah. Yep. So, okay, we'll go back to, those are just 2 points. There might be some questions on those, but we will go back to the original questions, or what we've got right now, and see what's there. Where should we begin?
Start at the bottom.
Okay, so Kim asks, can the rents change when the initial year funding tool is submitted before closing? I want to distinguish the rents, the contract rents that are in the CHAP and are entered into the HAP are really unaffected by all of this. This only has to deal with getting through that initial year, what some people call the sub-year. And so no, this has no impact on the contract rents themselves.
But the issue is, if you PHA initially submits the funding tool in April and thinks it's going to close, for argument's sake, in July, and it turns out it's not going to close to September, it will submit a different set of numbers closer to the closing date because there'll be 4 months left rather than 6 months.
Right. Thank you. Yep. Okay. John from Chicago asks, for Tool, what happens if converting units are coming from more than 1 amp? Okay, we've just answered that one. But I'll just repeat it. If the converting units are coming from multiple amps, then the PHA would submit multiple tools. Okay. Kim asks, back to Kim, if you close December 1, your half effective date would be January 1, 2017. So it depends on the, so the closing is defined on really by when the use agreement gets recorded. And so if the, really the cutoff, just to clarify, I think the real cutoff that the closing team uses is November 30th, or the last date of the month, if I understand correctly. And so if you close by November 30th and you get a December 1 half effective date, that's it. Then, and if you close in December, anytime in December, then you'll have a January 1 half effective date.
And therefore a 12-month.
12-month initial year for funding from public housing. Okay, Veronica asks, can we spend all CFP on capital improvements and use separate reserves to cover half costs in the first year? Yes. First thing to say is, if somebody filled out this tool and said, this is not enough revenue, for the property, because not only do I have to pay operating expenses, but I'm already starting to pay debt service, and my lender is nervous, etc. A has no ability to provide to supplement this in any way. Second thing, though, is you can the transaction can always build in an operating reserve escrow or something like that that covers this period. Probably the way you might structure that is if this is the only period you're worried about, and it's not like a tax credit deal with a 6-month operating reserve already built in, which might satisfy this completely. But if it's just this period you're worried about, you might create a separate reserve that after the initial year reverts to some other project purpose. Yeah, certainly PHAs can establish a reserve. To Veronica's question, can a PHA not use the capital funds at all as the for the initial year rental assistance, but rely on reserve funds, or possibly not establish a reserve at all? And yes, that's fine too. Our transaction managers are not doing any special underwriting for this initiative, where we are just looking at the long-term project financials under the contract rents. And so if you determine that it's not needed with your partners, then that is fine with us. Okay, now we have somebody's raised their hand. Oh, somebody just put their hand down. Nope, lost them. Okay. Right now there are no hands raised, so if anyone raises their hand, they'll be first in line. And are there any more written questions, Leanne?
No.
No more written questions. We'll give folks just a couple more minutes in case there's anything more ruminating before we break. And this always hopefully goes without saying with RAD, but if you ever have any suggestions, feedback, questions, please get them to rad@hud.gov, and we'll try our best to be responsive.
Press 1 to send your message, 2 to delete it, 3 to listen to it, 4 to re-record it, 5 to append to it, 6 to send a receipted message, 7 to mark it private, or 8 to mark it urgent. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like that is it with both the hands raised and the oral questions as well as the written questions. I thank you. We thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope this was useful as you finish out your RAD conversions. Thank you so much.